Hi, I'm Grace. My mother-in-law screamed, "She can live in the dog's kennel!" Then shoved my little girl outside into the rain like she was trash. And my husband, he just stood there, silent, watching. That moment, something broke in me. You think betrayal hurts? Try watching the man you love say nothing while your child shivers on a doorstep. But what I did next, well, let's just say, she didn't remember it. Until she woke up in the hospital. Before we dive in, what time are you listening and where are you? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. The rain had been coming down in sheets since noon, soaking the sidewalks and flooding the gutters along our quiet Maryland neighborhood. I had to park halfway down the block from Liza's school. The pickup lane was a mess of blinking hazard lights and honking horns. I stepped out into the wet, my boots slapping against the puddles. The birthday gift sat carefully wrapped on the passenger seat, Liza's careful handwriting labeling it, "For Ellie." It was her stepsister's birthday. Not that Ellie ever said much to her, but Liza still insisted on getting her something sweet, a handmade bracelet set. She climbed into the car, her cheeks pink from the cold, ponytail dripping from the run to the curb. "You sure we have to go, Mom?" she asked, peering out through the rain-spattered window. "I know," I said softly, "but your stepdad really wanted us to be there." The drive to Margaret's was silent, except for the wipers screeching across the windshield and the faint hum of the heater. Jason hadn't answered my text earlier when I asked if we should still come, given the storm. That silence hung heavy in the car. When we pulled into the driveway, I already sensed something was off. No porch light, no welcome. Just the dark silhouette of Margaret's house, shadows flickering from the dining room inside. Liza gripped the gift tightly as we walked up. I opened the front door gently. Jason had said to come right in. Margaret was standing near the table, a cake in her hands. She turned the moment she saw us. Her eyes locked on Liza and her whole face stiffened. "This night is for family," she said, her voice sharp and loud enough to hush the room. Liza looked up at me, her lip trembling. She stepped forward and held out the wrapped gift. "It's for Ellie," she said. Margaret didn't even blink. She snatched the card off the top, tore it open, scanned it, and then dropped it to the floor like it was trash. I stood there, my coat still clinging to me, my shoes leaving little puddles on the hardwood floor. Jason was seated off to the side. He looked at his plate. "Mom, not now," he mumbled. But Margaret had already turned. She marched to the back door, flung it open. The wind howled through the kitchen. "She can sleep in the dog's kennel," Margaret snapped. "That's all she deserves." Before I could even process her words, she grabbed Liza's arm and shoved her toward the back porch. Liza stumbled into the rain, backpack still on her shoulders. My heart lurched. I rushed to the door, reaching out for her, just as Margaret slammed it in my face. "Jason!" I turned, breathless, my voice low but shaking. He didn't look at me, just stared at his napkin. I turned back, threw open the door again. Liza was standing in the yard, drenched. Her arms hugged her backpack like it was the only safe place left in the world. Her sneakers were soaked through, socks sloshing. I stepped into the rain, stripped off my coat, and wrapped it around her. "Let's go," I whispered. I didn't say a word to anyone else. I didn't even close the door behind me. We drove home in silence. The only sound was the heater struggling to warm the air. Liza clutched her backpack in her lap. Her lips were pressed tight, but tears slid quietly down her cheeks. I didn't tell her to stop. I didn't wipe them away. As we pulled into the driveway, I caught a flicker of movement in the rearview mirror. Margaret, standing at the second-floor window, arms crossed, a cruel little smirk curling her lips. Inside, I helped Liza into dry clothes, made her some hot cocoa, and tucked her under a heavy blanket on the couch. I picked up her soaked backpack to dry it out. It sagged with water. As I pulled out her folders and the wrapped bracelet, a crumpled piece of paper fell to the floor. It was a note. The handwriting was unmistakable. Jason's. "Don't bring her tonight. It'll upset Mom. Just come alone." I stared at the words. They felt like a slap I hadn't seen coming. So that was why he hadn't answered. He didn't want us there. Didn't want her there. I held the note in my hands, the paper damp and curling at the edges. My eyes burned. Then I stood. I crossed the room, picked up my phone from the counter, and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. The line rang, once, twice, and then I heard the voice. "Hello?" I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until the call screen flashed. Calling Aunt Melba. I froze, thumb hovering. My heart thudded against my ribs like it had something urgent to say. But I didn't let the line connect. I tapped end before it could ring. The rain was still going, soft and steady now, tapping against the kitchen window like it wanted to be let in. I turned to look at Liza, curled on the living room couch beneath every dry blanket I could find. She'd fallen asleep in the clothes she wore when they pushed her into the yard, still damp, one sock halfway off. Her small fingers clutched the stuffed koala I kept in the car for emergencies. I walked over and gently brushed her hair off her cheek. Her skin was still cool. I found a towel and carefully patted down her curls, trying not to wake her. She stirred once and murmured something in her sleep. I didn't catch it. I just stood there, hands still, watching her chest rise and fall like it was the only sound that mattered. In the kitchen, I made tea, but left the mug untouched. I sat at the table, staring into the steam like it might offer answers. The room felt too quiet without her laughter. Without the noise Jason's family always filled our life with. Criticism masked as just being honest. I opened my laptop and clicked into my old email account, one I hadn't touched in years. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Maybe proof that I hadn't always been this muted. That once I tried to say something. I went to the drafts folder. There it was. A message dated 4 years ago. Just sitting there like it had been waiting for me all this time. It was addressed to Jason. Subject, just so you know. I clicked it open. My fingers hovered above the keyboard as I read the words I'd typed back then. "If you ever make me choose between your family and my daughter, I won't beg. I'll just go." I remembered the day I wrote it. It was right after Thanksgiving. Margaret had told Liza she wasn't really family. Jason had told me to let it slide. I hadn't. I'd gone to our room and typed the email in one go, fingers trembling. But then I didn't send it. I don't even remember why. Maybe I hoped things would get better, or maybe I just didn't want the fallout. I reread the message, slowly, line by line. My hands started shaking again, but this time from something colder, not fear, not regret, something heavier, like recognition. I had seen this moment coming a long time ago. I clicked into the body of the draft and started editing, just a few words at first. But then I paused. My thumb hovered over send. I couldn't do it. Instead, I pressed delete. And just like that, it was gone. Like it had never existed. I sat back in the chair, feeling emptied, but something in me resisted, letting that be the last word. I opened another folder, one labeled Voice Notes. I hadn't listened to any of these in years. They were mostly reminders, snippets, nothing important. But then I saw the file. Dad, June 14th. I hit play. His voice came through, a little crackly, like it had been pressed between time and static. Grace, honey, if you're listening to this, it's 'cause I didn't get to say it in person. Never let them treat your child like she's less. You hear me? You're worth more than that. And so is she. Don't you ever forget. My eyes burned. I pressed the phone to my chest and let the silence stretch. Not the kind that comes from being alone, but the kind that comes when someone finally tells you the truth. And you believe it. The headlights cut across the front of the house a few minutes later. I didn't need to look to know whose car it was. I didn't move. Just listen to the engine stop, the door shut, and his shoes scuff the walkway. Jason came in like it was any other night. Keys hit the dish, jacket tossed on the chair. His voice, too casual. You left early? I didn't answer. He glanced toward the couch. She could have stayed home. That wasn't the time for her. Still, I said nothing. I kept my eyes on the tea I hadn't touched. The silence thickened between us, stretching like a rope pulled too tight. He let out a short sigh, dismissive, like this was just one more moment I'd get over. Whatever, he muttered, then disappeared down the hall. The bedroom door closed behind him without a click, just a lazy push. I waited until I couldn't hear his footsteps anymore. Then I turned back to Liza. Her tiny hand had curled near her face, thumb almost at her lips like when she was a toddler. Her breathing was slow, even. I leaned down, brushed a kiss to her forehead, and whispered the truth out loud. Not to her, but for myself. You're not going to remember this, but I will, forever. I stayed still for a long time, watching Liza's chest rise and fall, her little hand tucked beneath her cheek. The storm outside had quieted into a distant rumble, but inside me, something was unraveling. The kind of silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was sharp, surgical. The kind that slices through memory whether you invite it or not. Without realizing it, I slipped into one of those memories. 7 years ago. I was standing in the kitchen of Jason's family home, clutching a warm casserole dish against my chest like it could protect me. The place smelled like expensive candles and something baked from scratch, neither of which had come from me. My hands were sweating through the oven mitts. I had spent an hour just choosing the right side dish at the store, hoping it wouldn't look too last minute. Jason's mother stood across the room, tall, composed, wearing a pearl necklace that never seemed to move. She glanced at the dish I placed on the counter. Next time, don't bring store-bought, she said. Not even a smile. I froze. I thought she might be joking. But her eyes didn't soften. Jason didn't defend me. He was already grabbing a beer from the fridge, chatting with his brother. That night, on the drive home, I laughed nervously and asked, "Was that supposed to be a joke?" Jason glanced at me like I was being dramatic. "Just ignore her," he said, grinning. "She doesn't mean it." But she had meant it. And something in me had registered it, not as a punch, but a paper cut, one of those small things you barely notice until you've been sliced 100 times and suddenly everything stings. I didn't say anything more that night. I just watched the trees blur past the car window and wondered why I felt like crying over a casserole. That moment was the first fracture I remember, the first time I realized I might have to keep parts of myself quiet just to fit into their picture. And the cuts didn't stop. There were the times they planned birthday dinners for Jason and forgot to tell me until the night before, the family photos I was never asked to join. "Oh, we thought you were helping in the kitchen." The holiday cards where my name was squeezed in like an afterthought, if at all. And every time, Jason's response was the same: "Don't overthink it, babe." But I wasn't overthinking. I was erasing myself. I blinked, and the memory faded. Back in the present, I walked into the kitchen. The air still smelled like storm and damp wool. I flipped on the light, but it flickered, half-hearted. I opened the drawer next to the stove, the one that stuck a little if you pulled too fast. There it was, the same casserole dish. It sat at the back, untouched, still wrapped in the cheap plastic I'd used to move it from Jason's house to this one. I hadn't used it since that day. Not once. I stared at it for a while. Then, slowly, I lifted it out. My hands didn't tremble, but they felt heavier than they should have, like that ceramic dish still carried all the weight of that night and every moment since. I stepped outside barefoot, the rain now no more than a mist in the air. The porch creaked under my weight. I walked to the edge, near the trash bins, and set the dish down beside them. I didn't toss it, just left it, like someone gently letting go of a name that no longer fits. Back inside, the house was quiet again. Liza hadn't stirred. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror on the way back in. Tired eyes, damp hair, a woman who looked like she was still waiting for permission to feel what she felt. I stared for a long time, and in my head, I heard it. It wasn't just tonight. It never was just tonight. I stepped away and pulled out my old notebook from the cabinet, the one I used to jot grocery lists and meal plans back when I still thought I'd get it all right. I sat at the table, flipped to a fresh page, and wrote in bold, "What I know now." The words sat there like a challenge, like something I owed myself. Not the polished version, not the one I'd explain away to keep peace. I pressed my pen against the paper again, slower this time. They never saw me as family, only a placeholder. I exhaled, long and quiet. Then I put the pen down and looked toward the window. The rain had finally stopped. I watched the ink dry beneath the first bullet I had just written. They never saw me as family, only a placeholder. The words stared back at me like they'd been waiting years to be acknowledged. I closed the notebook slowly and set it on the bathroom counter. My reflection met me head-on. Same tired eyes, same forced poise. I adjusted the collar of my blouse. The buttons felt tighter than usual, like my body knew this evening would be constriction in every form. From behind, I heard the soft knock of knuckles against the bathroom door. Jason's voice followed, a low, clipped murmur. "Grace, we should leave in 5. I opened the door and stepped out. He stood in the hallway, already dressed, already detached. His cologne hit first, overcompensating for whatever tension we wouldn't say out loud. "Let's not make this dinner awkward, okay?" he said, not really looking at me. I blinked. "Sure, I'll try to pretend like everything's fine, like always." Jason didn't respond, just walked down the stairs, pulling his coat over his shoulder. I grabbed my purse, checked on Liza, who was quietly sketching in her notebook, and said gently, "Let's head out, sweetheart." The ride over was heavy with silence. Jason turned the radio on, a soft jazz station, and neither of us spoke. Liza sat in the back, her head resting against the window, quiet as a whisper. When we pulled into the driveway of his parents' home, I already felt that old sensation, stepping into someone else's territory, like crossing into a room where you're expected to apologize just for showing up. Barbara opened the door before we knocked, all smiles and perfume. "There you are," she said, her tone already sweetened for performance. "Jason, you look so sharp tonight. Promotion must be suiting you." She turned to me, her smile thinning. "And Grace, you brought a salad, right? The girls and I were just saying, you always bring store-bought, don't you?" Before I could respond, Jason laughed nervously and placed a hand on my lower back, gently nudging me inside. "Let's not keep dinner waiting." We sat at the long, polished dining table that I'd always found too formal for a family of 4. Liza was seated at the far end, too distant to hold my hand. Barbara kept the spotlight on Jason, praising his new title, recounting stories from his childhood, and occasionally tossing jabs my way like garnishes, meant to be subtle but bitter. "And Grace, dear," she said, reaching for the bread basket, "how's your little art thing going? Still painting birds and barns?" She chuckled lightly and took a sip of wine. Jason didn't flinch. He buttered his roll. I smiled politely. "Actually, I'm curating a collection for a nonprofit that supports veterans with PTSD. But I guess that doesn't come up in your wine club, does it?" Her eyebrows lifted briefly before she turned to refill her glass. Dinner went on. I chewed, swallowed, smiled on cue, until his father, quiet, rigid, barely speaking all night, reached into the pocket of his blazer and slid an envelope across the table toward me. My fingers froze on the stem of my glass. "What's this?" I asked, though I already sensed something was wrong. "It's just a formality," Jason mumbled. "We'll explain after dinner." I opened the envelope anyway. Inside was a document I'd never seen before, dated 3 months ago. A loan agreement, in my name. I scanned the fine print. It wasn't just a signature line, it had my signature, or something meant to pass for it. I stared at the page, feeling heat crawl into my face. "You forged this?" Jason didn't answer. He focused on his plate. Barbara reached for another slice of roast, humming lightly as if we were discussing the weather. I held up the document. "Jason, you forged my name." He still didn't look at me. "It was just to secure the remodel on their lake house. It wouldn't have gone through without joint assets listed." I let the silence speak for me. My hands trembled slightly, but my voice didn't crack. Barbara finally chimed in. "You're part of the family, Grace. You owe us stability. That means pitching in." Liza looked up then, her eyes darting between us like she was watching glass start to crack. I placed my napkin carefully on the table. I didn't throw it. I didn't shout. That would have been too easy for them. Instead, I stood slowly. If I ever owed anything in this family, it was basic decency, and not one of you has repaid that. Not once. Barbara blinked, caught off guard by the calm. Jason cleared his throat but said nothing. I walked over to Liza and crouched next to her chair. "Go wait in the car, baby," I whispered. She nodded, eyes wide but trusting. She slipped off her chair and walked past her grandmother without a word. The sound of the front door closing behind her was like punctuation. Barbara took a sip of wine. "What are you going to do, Grace?" "Call a lawyer?" she said, voice full of amusement. I turned to her, eyes steady. "That depends," I said. "Are you afraid I might?" The words still echoed in my head as I drifted off that night. That depends. Are you afraid I might? It wasn't bravado. It was the first time I'd spoken from the place inside me that had gone ignored for far too long, but courage doesn't sleep through the night. Morning brought the familiar chill of loneliness and silence that didn't just surround me, but sank into my bones. Jason's side of the bed was empty, sheets untouched, pillows still fluffed. The faint scent of his cologne had faded by now, replaced by the cool sterility of avoidance. I sat up slowly, glancing at the faint blue light filtering through the curtains. My hand reached for my phone instinctively. Nothing from him all night. Downstairs, I heard Liza's footsteps, small, steady, trying not to wake me. She must have already packed her bag. I threw on a cardigan and made it down before she left. She looked up from the kitchen counter, holding her thermos like it might explain why she didn't want to speak. "You heading out?" I asked gently. She nodded. "Yeah, bus'll be here soon." "Okay." "Do you want me to walk you to the stop?" She shook her head. "It's fine. I can go alone." She lingered for a moment, then opened the front door. Before stepping out, she looked back over her shoulder. Her eyes searched mine like she wanted to say something, but wasn't sure if I could hold it. "Have a good day, baby," I whispered. The door clicked shut. I stood in the middle of the kitchen. My phone buzzed on the counter. I reached for it without thinking. A text from Jason. "You overreacted. You embarrassed everyone." I stared at the screen, fingers hovering. My thumb found the delete button almost reflexively. Then I paused, swiped to recently deleted, and tapped restore. Not today. I sat down, trying to sip my now cold coffee, but my hand trembled. I pressed the cup down and opened the screen again, just for a moment of distraction. That's when I noticed something odd. A voice memo. It was time-stamped from the night before. I never record memos. My heart pounded as I hit play. Jason's voice came through first, soft, muffled like he thought no one would ever hear. "She won't fight this. She never does." Then Barbara's sharper tone cut in, crisp as glass. "Grace is comfortable being walked over. That's what makes her manageable." He chuckled. "She's too broken to do anything." My lungs felt tight. My fingers stopped working. I just sat there, still, staring at the screen as those words repeated in my mind, too broken to do anything. Somewhere between the fridge and the floor, I lost my balance. I slid down, knees curling to my chest, back against the cold appliance. Liza's drawing of our family was taped there, colorful and lopsided. She'd drawn me holding a sunflower. My breath hitched. I didn't make a sound. I just let the tears fall, quiet and steady, like they'd been waiting. How had I gotten here? How had I been convinced so thoroughly that I was less, that I had no say in my own story? A soft knock at the front door pulled me back. I wiped my face quickly, stood up slower than usual. When I opened the door, Rena stood there, my former student from the community center art class. She was holding something in her arms. "Hey," she said. "You left this last week." She held out my old sketchbook. "Oh, thank you. I didn't even realize." She smiled awkwardly. I've been meaning to say this. I know things were messy at that place, but you were the only one who told me my voice mattered, that I didn't have to play small just to be liked." That hit harder than she knew. I looked at her, young, nervous, still unsure if kindness was safe. I reached out, squeezing her hand lightly. "Thank you, Rena. That means more than you know." She nodded, and left just as quietly as she came. Back inside, I placed the sketchbook down on the table. I stared at it for a while, then walked to the bathroom and stood in front of the mirror. The woman looking back at me didn't look angry. She looked awake. Faint circles under her eyes, a mouth pressed into something like determination, and a whisper, barely audible, slipped out before I even realized I was speaking. When did I stop living like I mattered? The question hung there. No answer came, but something stirred. I walked back to the kitchen, grabbed my laptop from the charger. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, then began moving, hesitant but steady. I pulled up bank records, scanned transaction histories, every transfer Jason made without my consent. I took screenshots, saved text threads, labeled folders, anything that could prove I'd been pushed aside, and now refused to stay there. Then I opened the memo one more time. I listened again. She's too broken to do anything. I closed my eyes, breathed in deep. Before I could hesitate, I forwarded it to a hidden folder on my private drive. Then I deleted it from my phone. Not out of fear, out of focus. The last thing I did was lock my phone, hold it in both hands, and let the silence answer everything Jason and Barbara thought they knew about me. "You said I'd never fight back," I whispered. "You're about to find out how wrong you were." It took me the better part of 3 nights to sleep again. Each evening, I'd lie in bed, hearing Jason's voice from that recording playing on loop. "She's too broken to do anything." By Thursday morning, something inside me had shifted. Not shattered, shifted. Like the pieces of me had quietly rearranged themselves, not for comfort, but for clarity. That morning, I stood in front of my closet longer than I should have. The invitation to Barbara's brunch had arrived 2 days ago, hand-delivered by some assistant I didn't recognize. A floral card, scented like something she probably thought smelled expensive. I almost tossed it in the trash. But instead, I hung it on the fridge beside Liza's newest drawing of the two of us holding hands beneath a giant sun. That fridge door had become a battleground of truths. So I let them sit there, side by side, one full of contempt, the other of quiet hope. I didn't tell Liza I was going. I packed her lunch, kissed her forehead, and watched her skip toward the school bus. When the door clicked shut behind me, the silence wrapped around my ribs, like it was daring me to breathe. I opened the closet again, and this time, I didn't hesitate. Slate gray slacks, cream blouse, hair pulled back with deliberate ease. Not glamorous, not flashy, just precise. A kind of elegance that whispered, "I remember who I am." The drive to Barbara's estate was shorter than I remembered. Funny how time bends when your hands are steady. Her front gates opened like a smirk. The valet took my keys with a glance that lingered just a little too long, like he wasn't used to guests arriving alone. As I stepped inside, the chatter quieted. The clink of champagne glasses paused mid-air. I didn't need to scan the room to know. I was the punchline walking in before the joke. Jason stood near the fireplace, pretending not to see me. His eyes flicked to the floor the moment mine met his. Barbara swept toward me like a peacock in full display. "Oh, look who finally showed up," she sang out, her voice dripping with the kind of hospitality that only exists in expensive homes and false friendships. "Barbara," I said, nodding once. "Thank you for the invitation." "Of course, dear. We were just talking about you. Weren't we, everyone?" Her eyes glittered with amusement. Still raising that little girl on your own?" A few cousins chuckled. A few looked away. I didn't flinch. I just reached for a glass of water and found a quiet spot at the long oak table. The brunch spread was, as always, excessive. Over-buttered croissants, tiny glass jars of jam, sliced fruits no one would touch. I listened, observed. Let them do what they do best, fill the air with empty sentences. Until Barbara leaned in closer to her sister, voice just loud enough for the room to hear. Maybe that girl really should have stayed in the dog kennel. It seemed to suit her. The fork in my hand slipped. It hit the porcelain plate with a sharp clang. Silence. Not the awkward kind. The kind that slices through the spine of a room and makes people hold their breath. I stood. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You think you're clever, Barbara," I began, my eyes never leaving hers. "You sit in this house, surrounded by crystal and flowers and people who nod when you speak. But let me ask, what kind of woman locks her granddaughter in a cage and calls it discipline?" Someone gasped. A spoon clinked. I let it hang there. "That night," I said, scanning the table slowly, "my daughter cried behind a locked door while you toasted mimosas. Jason," I paused long enough for him to look up, "stood there and did nothing. Not one of you moved. Not one of you thought to ask why." Barbara's mouth opened, but I held up a hand. "No, this time everyone will hear the truth." I turned back to the table. "She was 4 years old, and all she'd done was spill juice, and you," my gaze sharpened, "called her an animal." No one dared speak. I thought silence would protect her, that dignity meant keeping peace. I was wrong. I stepped back from the table, my voice now just above a whisper. "You taught my daughter she was worthless, but she isn't. I'm here to remind you." Then I set the water glass down and walked out. No shaking, no tears, just the echo of heels on marble and the weight of every eye following me down the hall. The sun hit my face as I reached the driveway. The valet scrambled to bring my car around, but I didn't look back, not until I heard footsteps behind me. "Jason." He caught up just as I reached the door. "Grace," he said, voice low. I turned, calm as ever. "If you're going to speak, make it count. Otherwise, step aside." His jaw clenched. "She'll destroy you." I unlocked the car, met his eyes one last time, and said, "Only if I stay silent." Jason's words still echoed in my head as I stood outside the grand old building, its stone facade lit up in soft golden lights. The gala was already in full swing inside. Music spilled into the night through the slightly ajar double doors. I could see movement through the frosted windows, shadows in cocktail dresses and tailored suits floating under chandeliers. I checked my phone again. The message was still there. "Come, you'll want to see this." No name, just that. Part of me hesitated. After the brunch, after the silence that followed my walkout, I knew this evening wasn't going to be just another fancy event. I didn't dress up to smile and pose. I came because something inside me wouldn't let me stay home. I stepped through the doors, my heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Nobody noticed me at first. Why would they? I wasn't wearing sequins or making a scene, just a simple black dress, my hair pulled back, eyes clear. The ballroom was massive, ceiling so high it swallowed sound. Crystal sconces glinted along the walls. Waiters wove through the crowd with trays of champagne. I took none. My hands stayed free. Then I saw her. Amelia. She stood near the far wall, her posture calm, a glass of water in hand. She caught my eye and gave me the faintest nod, nothing more, but enough. She remembered. That night, that rain, that scream. 18th. At the center of it all stood Barbara, dressed like royalty in a silver gown, surrounded by donors and politicians. She laughed too loudly, touched arms with too much familiarity. A microphone screeched gently, and the lights dimmed just slightly. All eyes turned toward the stage where Barbara took her place, shoulders lifted high. "Good evening, everyone," she began, with that practiced smile. "Tonight isn't just about celebrating Jason's incredible leadership. It's about honoring family, legacy, the values we pass on." I stood still, close enough to hear every word, far enough not to be noticed. "The things we do behind closed doors," she continued, "are what truly define our character. That's what this family has always believed in: strength, unity, grace." The room echoed with polite applause. And then, the screen behind her flickered. It wasn't the planned slideshow. No polished family portraits, no logos. It was grainy at first. Dark. A porch. The air changed. I didn't blink. I knew that porch, that slant of rain, that small, shaking figure with soaked hair clinging to her face. Liza, my daughter. Someone near me gasped. The sound snapped across the room like a spark. The video cut quickly between angles, the back door, the front camera, Liza's desperate knock, Barbara's silhouette in the hall. Then, clearly, her arm reaching for the lock and slamming it shut. Another cut, Jason in the living room, glancing, then walking away. It was short, less than a minute, but when it ended, you could feel it. Silence. Someone whispered near me, "That's her granddaughter?" Barbara's voice cracked. "Turn it off," she shouted toward the tech booth. "That's not part of the program." But nothing happened. The techs were looking around, confused. Another voice cut through. "That footage was submitted anonymously, but verified." Amelia had stepped forward, calm, clear, no malice. "Someone thought the truth mattered more than image." Barbara spun toward me like a spotlight had landed. "You!" she barked. "This was you!" I stayed where I was. "This was never about me," I said. "It was about what you did, and still won't regret." Jason moved toward the stage. "Mom, maybe we should step aside." I turned toward him, voice steady. "You let your daughter freeze in the rain because your mother told you to." The silence that followed was different, heavier. Some guests shifted, others turned to each other with barely concealed discomfort. A woman in a red dress whispered, "Is this real? Did they really?" I didn't move. I didn't explain, because I didn't need to. The truth was enough. Reporters, maybe 4 or 5, had moved closer now. I saw the flash of a phone camera, someone else scribbling notes. Jason looked cornered. Barbara looked feral. A man in a navy suit I recognized from past events leaned toward Jason and said something that made Jason's face drain of color. Amelia stepped beside me, her voice low. "You okay?" I nodded. My legs were steady. My breath was even. Guests began to leave, quietly at first, then in trickles. Some didn't finish their drinks. A couple pulled Jason aside. He tried to smile. It didn't land. Barbara, still frozen on stage, watched the room unravel. Then, all at once, she lunged toward me. "You ruined everything," she screamed. Her voice cracked into a screech. I didn't move. I met her eyes and said quietly, clearly, "No." I ended what never should have begun. Barbara's scream still echoed in my ears long after the ballroom had emptied. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The footage, the gasps, the silence after, those moments clung to my skin like smoke after a fire. By morning, a call jolted me from the couch. Unknown number. "Mrs. Rylan?" A calm female voice said. "This is Mercy General Hospital. We need your consent regarding a patient, Barbara Rylan. You're listed as next of kin and power of attorney." I sat up, confused. There must be a mistake. "I'm not—" "The documents are still active in your name, ma'am," the voice said. "Mr. Jason Rylan hasn't updated them. We've tried reaching him. No response. We need someone to authorize sedation continuation for psychiatric observation." My hands clenched the throw blanket. "I'll be there." 20 minutes later, I walked through the hospital's main entrance, the bright overhead lights already irritating my eyes. The receptionist barely glanced up as she pointed me toward the east wing. The hallway smelled of disinfectant and late-night regrets. A nurse in soft green scrubs met me at the double doors of the psych observation unit. "She's been restrained for her own safety," the nurse said gently, leading me through. There was an episode. Of course there was. We turned a corner and entered a private room. Barbara lay on a hospital cot, her arms lightly strapped, eyes unfocused, but not entirely gone. Her hair was tangled, lips dry. The night's perfect image of power was gone, washed out by fluorescent lights and tranquilizers. "She was brought in around 3 a.m., said a man in a white coat. Dr. Lambert's, according to his badge. Multiple outbursts, tried to hit 2 nurses. Screamed something about betrayal, legacy, her son failing her." I didn't speak, just nodded. "She's calmer now. We need your authorization to continue her observation plan. You still hold power of attorney." I blinked. I didn't know that." Dr. Lamberts gave a sympathetic shrug. "It happens more often than you'd think. If the papers aren't updated after marriage, the designation remains." I took the clipboard with trembling fingers. "And Jason?" "Unreachable," the nurse said. Of course he was. I stepped outside for air, pulling my phone from my purse. No messages. I dialed Jason anyway. Straight to voicemail. I stared out the small window near the vending machines, then recorded a message. "They need you here. Your mother needs someone to make choices. I shouldn't be the one standing here, Jason. But maybe this is who you are now. A man who hides until it's safe to resurface. Or are you just her puppet?" Back in the room, Barbara's eyes fluttered open. She didn't look surprised to see me. "You came," she croaked. I pulled a chair over, sat beside her but didn't reach for her hand. "The hospital called." Her eyes narrowed. "You think you've won." Her voice was weak, but the venom still found its way through. "There's no winner here, Barbara," I said quietly. "Only truth, only consequences. You chose to leave a little girl outside in the rain and lock the door, and now the world knows." "She's not even my real granddaughter," Barbara hissed. "And you were never family." I didn't flinch. I'd heard worse from her, veiled behind pearls and polished smiles. This was her honest voice, ugly and raw. I stood slowly. "Then you'll understand why I won't be signing anything." Her eyes flickered in panic, but I turned away before she could spit out whatever poison she had left. As I stepped into the hallway, I pulled an envelope from my purse and handed it to the nurse on duty. For Mr. Jason Rylan. Please give it to him if he shows up. She nodded. Of course. Inside the envelope, a copy of custody filing papers for Liza, an annulment petition, and the hospital's invoice for Barbara's treatment, addressed in full to her insurance. Outside, the day had warmed. The clouds had finally broken, letting sunlight fall over the parking lot. I stood by my car for a long moment, just breathing, not because it was over, but because something had finally shifted. When I got home, Liza ran from the living room and threw herself into my arms. "Did Grandma say sorry?" she asked, eyes hopeful. I knelt to her level and touched her cheek. She said enough. Liza smiled, and that was enough for now. Later that evening, just as I was folding laundry on the couch, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Jason standing there, disheveled, eyes bloodshot, tie half loosened like he'd just crawled out of some conference room or bottle. "We need to talk," he said, voice hoarse. I didn't blink. "We don't," I replied, steady. "But the court might." Jason shifted his weight in the doorway, hands shoved deep in the pockets of a jacket he clearly hadn't changed in days. His voice cracked. "We need to talk." I didn't blink. "We don't. But the court might." I closed the door without slamming it. I didn't need drama. I needed peace. 3 weeks later, the morning sun streamed through the courthouse windows like it had somewhere better to be. I sat on a hard bench outside Family Courtroom 3B, my fingers resting on the folder in my lap. Inside were copies of the custody filings, the annulment request, the hospital documentation, and a short letter I hadn't opened yet. The receptionist had handed it to me earlier with a curious glance. "This came addressed to you, from Ridgefield Psychiatric." I didn't need to flip the envelope to guess the handwriting. Jason arrived 10 minutes late. No surprise there. His shirt was wrinkled, jaw unshaven, and he looked like he hadn't slept. I stood as he approached, but I didn't say anything. I just handed him the same manila envelope I'd left at the hospital weeks ago. He didn't take it right away. "Grace. Look, I didn't know she was going to—" I cut him off quietly. "You didn't want to know. That's the difference." He ran a hand through his hair, then pointed at the courtroom door. "We don't have to do this in front of a judge. We can figure something out." I shook my head. "This isn't about figuring something out anymore. It's about protecting Liza from silence, from pretending things are fine when they never were." He looked like he wanted to argue, but the bailiff called our names. I turned and walked in. He followed. Judge Margolis was a small woman with sharp eyes and no time for theatrics. She reviewed the paperwork silently while we stood, side by side but a universe apart. "You're petitioning for full custody," she said, flipping through the pages. "Yes, Your Honor," I replied, my voice steady. "And you're seeking annulment, citing emotional coercion, failure of disclosure, and legal complications surrounding parental guardianship?" "Yes, ma'am." Jason cleared his throat. "I wasn't trying to hide anything. I was trying to keep peace between them." The judge didn't look up. "By allowing your mother to treat your wife and stepdaughter like disposable furniture?" Jason's lips parted, but no sound came out. Then the judge paused, glancing at the unopened envelope on her bench. "This was submitted by a third party from Ridgefield," she said. "Permission to read it into the record?" I nodded. Jason just stared. She opened the letter and read aloud. "To whom it may concern, I, Barbara Ann Welling, write this under medical supervision and with a clearer mind than I've had in years. Jason is not to blame for my actions. I manipulated him for most of his life. I fed him a story about loyalty, about family, about protecting me, all while punishing anyone who dared stand in the way, especially Grace. I threatened to cut Liza out of my will if Jason didn't comply with me. I told him Grace was using him, that she would leave. I was wrong, and now I live with that truth every day. I hope he can forgive himself. But I do not expect anyone else to. Sincerely, Barbara. There was silence, not courtroom silence, the kind that clutches the throat. Jason's shoulders trembled. For once, he didn't try to explain or justify. He just wept, silently. The judge finally looked up. Her voice softened, barely. Sometimes, healing begins when old ghosts lose their voice. She signed the papers. Full custody granted. Annulment in process. Outside, the sky had shifted, softer now. I didn't wait for Jason to catch up. He didn't try to. Liza's new room smelled like fresh paint and pine wood. We hadn't bought much, just a small desk, a bookshelf, and a twin bed with blue star sheets. But the window faced the backyard, where sunlight poured in each morning. She called it her galaxy window. I stood in the doorway as she unpacked a cardboard box. Her voice was light. "Mom? Can I put Mr. Pickles in the doghouse?" I blinked. "Mr. Pickles?" She held up the mangled stuffed dog she'd rescued from the donation pile. "He's a guard dog now." I walked out to the yard with her. The doghouse she'd built with scrap wood, and my supervision was barely taller than her knees, but she was proud of it. "He's guarding the new house," she declared, adjusting the crooked painted sign that read, "Home." I knelt beside her. "It's a good house and a good guard." That night, while she slept, I sat on the back steps with a cup of chamomile tea. Fireflies blinked in the trees. A breeze whispered through the grass, lifting the corners of my cardigan. I thought back to something my therapist had said once, when all of this was still buried inside me. "Some people build kennels for others to sleep in," she told me. "Stronger ones build homes." Barbara had screamed that Liza belonged in a kennel, that she was a mistake, a disgrace. Today, that kennel sits in our backyard, not as punishment, but as a symbol. It's empty. It always will be. So is Barbara's place in our lives. Sunday morning, Liza and I stood at the kitchen counter, rolling out pie crusts with flour in our hair. She giggled as I flicked a tiny puff at her nose. She grinned. "Mom, do you think Grandma ever wanted to bake with me?" I paused, then said honestly, "I don't think she knew how." She nodded, as if that answer made more sense than anything else. That kennel, it's just a memory now, rotting in the past with everything else we left behind. Have you ever had to protect your child from your own family? Would you have walked away or fought back like I did? Tell me in the comments. I read every one.